What if I told you that the most successful billionaire CEOs in history have been secretly using 3 psychological manipulation techniques? From Jesus Christ, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. They've all mastered what I call the Trinity of Influence, 3 ancient leadership secrets that turn ordinary people into devoted followers, willing to sacrifice everything for a vision. But here's what's terrifying. Most people don't even realize they're being influenced. These aren't religious tactics. They're pure psychological warfare disguised as inspiration. And by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how these 3 secrets work, why they're so dangerously effective, and how you can recognize when they're being used on you right now. The truth will shock you. If you're building anything that matters, the most powerful influence system in human history has been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. And once you understand it, you'll never see leadership the same way again. Here's something that will blow your mind. Every single billionaire CEO who has built a cult-like following uses the exact same psychological framework. But they didn't invent it. They stole it from someone who lived 2,000 years ago. Think about it. Steve Jobs had employees working 80-hour weeks, sleeping on factory floors, believing they were changing the world by making a phone. Elon Musk has engineers living in Tesla factories, convinced they're saving humanity by building cars. Jeff Bezos built an empire on people believing they were part of something bigger than themselves. Sound familiar? It should, because this is the exact same psychological pattern used by history's most influential leader, Jesus Christ. But here's what nobody talks about. Jesus wasn't just a spiritual teacher. He was a master of human psychology who understood something about influence that modern science is only now proving. He took 12 ordinary men, fishermen, tax collectors, outcasts, and turned them into a global movement that changed civilization forever. How? The first secret is so counterintuitive that it goes against everything we think we know about power and leadership. Most people believe that to lead you must dominate. You must be the strongest, the smartest, the most commanding presence in the room. That's what traditional alpha leadership looks like, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Jesus discovered something revolutionary. The most powerful form of influence doesn't come from being above people. It comes from being below them. While everyone else was trying to rule from the top, Jesus flipped the entire power structure upside down. He served others first. He washed feet. He made himself vulnerable, and this wasn't weakness. It was calculated psychological warfare. Because when someone in a position of power voluntarily makes themselves vulnerable to you, something extraordinary happens in your brain. Mirror neurons fire, oxytocin floods your system, your defensive walls crumble, and suddenly you're not just following a leader, you're following someone who genuinely cares about you. Modern billionaires have weaponized this exact principle. They call it servant leadership, but they're really using what I call the vulnerability advantage, the most sophisticated form of psychological influence ever discovered. But here's the disturbing part. This technique is so powerful that it bypasses your rational mind entirely. You think you're making logical decisions about who to follow, but you're actually being influenced by ancient psychological triggers that evolved over millions of years. Your brain can't tell the difference between genuine care and strategic vulnerability. That's why some employees will literally die for certain CEOs, while others won't even stay late for overtime. The difference isn't the salary or benefits, it's whether the leader has mastered this first secret of influence that Jesus discovered 2,000 years ago. Here's the shocking truth. Every CEO who has built a massive, devoted following doesn't just lead from the front, they lead from below. And they do it so skillfully that people don't even realize they're being influenced. Let's break down the psychological mechanics. When Jesus washed his disciples' feet, he was engaging what neuroscientists now call reciprocal altruism. Your brain is hardwired to respond to genuine service with loyalty, trust, and emotional investment. It's not just social conditioning, it's evolutionary programming. Steve Jobs mastered this perfectly. Yes, he was demanding and perfectionist, but watch old footage of him with his team. He didn't just bark orders, he rolled up his sleeves. He stayed up all night with engineers. He made himself part of their struggle. When the original Mac team was burning out, Jobs didn't demand more work. He brought them pizza at 3 a.m. and worked alongside them. That single act created more loyalty than any motivational speech ever could. But here's what most people miss. Jobs wasn't just being nice. He was strategically positioning himself as someone who shared their sacrifice. When leaders make themselves vulnerable to the same struggles as their team, something profound happens in the follower's brain. You stop seeing them as the boss and start seeing them as someone fighting alongside me. Elon Musk does this constantly. During Tesla's production hell, he didn't manage from a boardroom. He literally slept on the factory floor with his workers. He shared their pain. He made their struggle his struggle. And suddenly, these weren't just employees working for a paycheck. They were soldiers in Musk's army, willing to sacrifice everything for the mission. But here's what makes this so psychologically powerful. Vulnerability creates what researchers call leader-member exchange theory. When a powerful person makes themselves genuinely vulnerable to you, your brain doesn't just respect them, it bonds with them. You start seeing their success as your success, their mission as your mission. Jeff Bezos built Amazon's entire culture around this principle. His famous customer obsession wasn't just a business strategy, it was psychological manipulation. By positioning himself and Amazon as servants to customers, he created a company culture where employees see themselves as part of something noble, something bigger than profit. They're not just selling products, they're serving humanity. The data proves this works. Companies with servant leadership models have 50% higher employee engagement, 25% higher customer satisfaction, and significantly higher profitability. But here's the twist. Most leaders can't pull this off because it requires something most powerful people lack: the confidence to be genuinely vulnerable. Jesus had that confidence. He could make himself small because he knew his power came from connection, not domination. Modern billionaires who understand this principle don't just command respect, they inspire devotion. And devotion is infinitely more powerful than fear. The neuroscience is clear. When someone serves you from a position of power, it activates the same brain regions as falling in love. You literally become emotionally attached to leaders who demonstrate genuine vulnerability and service. That's why people don't just work for these leaders, they become emotionally invested in their success. Think of traditional leadership like being a king sitting on a throne. Distant, powerful, intimidating. Everyone bows, but they're only following out of fear or obligation. The moment the king shows weakness, the throne becomes vulnerable. But servant leadership is like being the coach of a championship team. The coach isn't the strongest player, but they're the most important person on the field. Why? Because they serve the team's success above their own ego. Players don't just respect the coach, they run through walls for them because they know the coach genuinely cares about their success. This is exactly what Jesus did with his disciples and what modern billionaire CEOs do with their teams. They flip the power dynamic. Instead of "I'm powerful, so serve me," it becomes "I'm powerful, so let me serve you." And paradoxically, this creates infinitely more influence than traditional dominance ever could. Here's the psychology. When someone with power voluntarily serves you, your brain interprets this as the highest form of respect and trust. You're not just an employee or follower, you're someone whose success matters to this powerful person. That psychological bond creates loyalty that money can't buy and fear can't match. Steve Jobs didn't just want great products, he served his team's ability to create great products. Elon Musk doesn't just want Mars colonization, he serves his engineers' vision of making it possible. This isn't manipulation in the evil sense, it's influence through genuine investment in others' success. But here's the key. It has to be genuine. People can sense authentic service versus fake humility from a mile away. Jesus was genuinely invested in his followers' growth and success. The billionaire CEOs who master this principle are genuinely invested in their teams and customers, not just using vulnerability as a tactic. That's why this first secret is so powerful and so rare. It requires leaders who are secure enough to make themselves vulnerable and wise enough to understand that true power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. When done authentically, it creates bonds stronger than any contract or salary could ever achieve. The most successful leaders in history understood this paradox. The way up is down. The way to gain power is to give it away through service. The way to be followed is to follow others' needs first. If this is exploding your mind, stop now and hit subscribe. The next secret will shatter everything you know about influence. Character count, 1 to 18, but servant leadership is just the foundation. The second secret Jesus used, and that every billionaire CEO has mastered, is far more sophisticated. It's about how you communicate ideas so powerfully that people don't just understand them, they can't forget them. Here's a question that will haunt you. Why do we still remember Jesus' teachings 2,000 years later, but you can't remember what your boss said in last week's meeting? The answer reveals something disturbing about how human psychology really works. We don't remember facts. We don't remember logical arguments. We remember stories that make us feel something. Jesus never gave PowerPoint presentations. He never handed out business plans or strategic roadmaps. Instead, he told stories. Simple stories about farmers, seeds, lost coins, and prodigal sons. But these weren't just stories. They were psychological weapons designed to bypass rational thinking and implant ideas directly into the emotional brain. Modern neuroscience has proven that stories activate multiple brain regions simultaneously. When you hear a story, your brain doesn't just process the words. It experiences the emotions, visualizes the scenes, and creates neural pathways that make the information nearly impossible to forget. This is why you can remember every detail of a movie you watched 10 years ago, but can't recall the facts from a textbook you read last month. Billionaire CEOs have weaponized this exact principle. They don't just share data, they craft narratives that make people feel like heroes in an epic story. And once someone sees themselves as the hero of your story, they'll fight to make that story come true. Steve Jobs never sold computers. He sold the story of rebels changing the world. His famous 1984 Super Bowl ad didn't explain technical specifications. It told a story about breaking free from conformity and choosing to think different. People didn't just buy Apple products, they bought into the narrative of being different, creative, revolutionary. Elon Musk doesn't sell cars, he sells the story of saving humanity from climate catastrophe. Tesla owners don't just drive electric vehicles. They see themselves as environmental warriors fighting for the planet's future. SpaceX employees don't just build rockets, they're pioneers making humanity multiplanetary. These aren't just jobs or purchases, they're roles in an epic narrative. This psychological mechanism is so powerful that researchers call it narrative transportation. When a story becomes so compelling that people literally transport themselves into it, adopting the values, goals, and identity of the characters. But here's what makes this truly manipulative. Jesus didn't just tell any stories. He told parables. Stories specifically designed to reveal hidden truths about reality and human nature. Each parable was a psychological mirror that forced listeners to confront something about themselves or their world they'd never seen before. Here's the revelation that will change how you see every successful leader. They don't just use stories, they use what I call identity parables, narratives specifically crafted to make you see yourself as a particular type of person. Jesus was a master of this. When he told the parable of the Good Samaritan, he wasn't just teaching about helping others. He was creating a psychological framework where listeners had to ask themselves, am I the type of person who would help or the type who would walk by? The story forced an identity decision. This is precisely what modern billionaire CEOs do, but they've refined it into a science. They create company narratives that force employees and customers to make identity choices. Are you the type of person who thinks different or follows the crowd? Are you someone who cares about the environment or someone who destroys it? Are you a pioneer of the future or stuck in the past? The psychological power is devastating because once someone adopts an identity, they will act consistently with that identity to maintain psychological coherence. If you see yourself as a rebel, you'll buy products and support companies that reinforce that identity. If you see yourself as an environmental warrior, you'll make choices that align with saving the planet. Jeff Bezos built Amazon's entire customer experience around identity parables. The company doesn't just deliver packages, it tells the story of making your life better, more convenient, more connected. Amazon Prime members don't just pay for faster shipping, they adopt the identity of someone whose time is valuable, whose convenience matters. Once you see yourself that way, you'll pay almost anything to maintain that identity. But here's what makes this psychologically manipulative. These leaders don't just tell you what to think, they create stories that make you want to think it. The most powerful form of influence isn't commanding someone to change their mind. It's telling a story so compelling that they convince themselves. Research shows that when people reach conclusions through stories rather than direct arguments, they hold those beliefs much more strongly and are much more resistant to counter-persuasion. Stories don't just inform, they transform identity at a neurological level. Mark Zuckerberg uses this constantly. Facebook's mission isn't just connecting people, it's the story of creating a global community where everyone belongs. Users don't just scroll social media, they participate in the grand narrative of human connection. Even when the platform creates problems, users stay loyal because leaving would mean abandoning their identity as part of this connected global family. The most sophisticated version of this is what I call future identity casting, telling stories that help people see who they could become, not just who they are. Tesla doesn't just sell cars to environmentally conscious people, it tells stories that help regular people see themselves becoming environmental heroes through their purchase decisions. Jesus did this perfectly with his disciples. He didn't recruit them as they were, he cast a vision of who they could become. Fishers of men, light of the world, salt of the earth. These weren't just metaphors, they were identity prophecies that his followers spent their lives fulfilling. Imagine your brain as a vast library filled with facts, but most of those books are covered in dust because nobody ever reads them. Now imagine someone comes in and doesn't just add another book. They perform a movie in the middle of the library, complete with drama, emotion, and characters you care about. That movie doesn't just get filed away with the other books. It becomes the story you can't stop thinking about, the narrative that influences every other decision you make. That's the difference between giving information and telling a parable. Traditional leadership says, here are the facts, now make the right choice. But parable-based influence says, here's a story that will help you discover what type of person you really are. The second approach is infinitely more powerful because people don't just learn something, they become someone. Jesus understood that humans aren't rational creatures who occasionally feel emotions. We're emotional creatures who occasionally think rationally. His parables bypassed logic entirely and spoke directly to identity, values, and emotional truth. When someone heard the story of the lost sheep, they didn't just understand God's love intellectually. They felt it viscerally and saw themselves as either the sheep worth finding or the shepherd willing to search. Modern billionaire CEOs have turned this into a formula. First, identify the identity your audience wishes they had. Second, create a narrative where using your product or joining your company transforms them into that identity. Third, make the story so emotionally compelling that choosing anything else feels like betraying who they want to become. Apple customers don't just buy phones, they join the story of creative rebels changing the world. Tesla owners don't just drive cars, they become environmental heroes saving the planet. Amazon customers don't just shop online, they become smart consumers who value their time and convenience. The psychology is ruthless. Once you adopt an identity through a story, you'll make choices to remain consistent with that identity, even when it's not in your best interest. You'll pay premium prices, work longer hours, and defend the company against criticism, because abandoning the narrative means abandoning part of who you see yourself to be. This is why Jesus' teachings survived 2,000 years while countless philosophical systems disappeared. Facts fade, but identity stories become part of your psychological DNA. They don't just change what you think, they change who you are. If you're watching this far, you are different. Prove it. Hit like and subscribe for the secrets most people will never know. But even servant leadership and identity parables aren't enough to create the ultimate influence. There's a third secret. The most psychologically devastating technique Jesus used, and the one that separates true visionary leaders from everyone else. Here's a question that will disturb you. Why are people willing to die for some leaders, but won't even work overtime for others? The answer reveals something terrifying about human psychology. The most powerful form of influence isn't getting people to do what you want. It's getting them to want what you're willing to sacrifice for. Jesus didn't just teach love and service. He demonstrated ultimate sacrifice. He gave up everything, comfort, safety, his life, for the mission. And that sacrifice didn't just inspire his followers, it psychologically bound them to the cause forever. Here's what most leaders don't understand. Humans are hardwired to follow sacrifice. When someone gives up something valuable for a principle or vision, our brains interpret that as proof the principle must be incredibly important. We don't just respect the sacrifice, we adopt the values that motivated it. This is why every billionaire CEO who has built a cult-like following has mastered what I call strategic sacrifice, the calculated decision to give up short-term gains to demonstrate long-term commitment to a mission that's bigger than themselves. Steve Jobs sacrificed enormous amounts of money by refusing to license Apple's operating system to other manufacturers. Wall Street called him crazy. He could have made billions in licensing fees. But by keeping Apple exclusive, he wasn't just protecting profits, he was sacrificing easy money to maintain the company's identity as premium, different, special. That sacrifice communicated to employees and customers that Apple's mission was more important than quick profits. Elon Musk has taken this to an extreme. He's repeatedly risked his entire fortune on Tesla and SpaceX. During Tesla's darkest moments, he could have sold out to traditional automakers for billions. Instead, he risked bankruptcy, invested his last dollars, and slept on factory floors. That sacrifice didn't just save the company. It created a narrative where employees and customers knew this wasn't just another business venture. This was a mission worth dying for. The psychology is brutal. When someone in power voluntarily sacrifices for a cause, everyone watching has to make a choice. Either the leader is crazy, or the cause is so important that it justifies extreme sacrifice. Most people choose to believe in the cause rather than admit they're following someone insane. Jeff Bezos embodied this for decades at Amazon. He sacrificed profits for growth, comfort for innovation, predictability for customer obsession. Shareholders complained for years about lack of profits, but employees and customers saw something different. A leader so committed to the long-term vision that he was willing to look foolish in the short term. But here's the manipulative genius. Strategic sacrifice creates what psychologists call commitment escalation. Once people witness your sacrifice for a cause, they feel psychologically obligated to make sacrifices too. Your sacrifice becomes proof that their sacrifices are justified and necessary. Here's the revelation that will shatter everything you think you know about leadership. The most powerful leaders don't just ask people to believe in their vision. They create situations where people must choose between their comfort and their values. And they make that choice easier by sacrificing first. Jesus mastered this psychological mechanism perfectly. He didn't just preach about loving your enemies and turning the other cheek. He demonstrated it by forgiving the people who crucified him. That ultimate sacrifice didn't just prove his teachings were true. It created a psychological bond so powerful that his followers were willing to face martyrdom rather than deny the faith. This is what researchers call costly signaling theory. The principle that sacrifices that cost you something valuable serve as honest signals of your true commitment. Anyone can say they believe in something, but only people who genuinely believe will pay a real price for it. Modern billionaire CEOs have weaponized this principle into what I call sacrifice leadership. The strategic use of personal sacrifice to create unbreakable loyalty and commitment in others. When Warren Buffett pledged to give away 99% of his wealth, he wasn't just being generous. He was sending a costly signal that his values around inequality and social responsibility weren't just talk. That sacrifice created enormous moral authority and influenced countless other billionaires to make similar commitments. When Bill Gates left Microsoft in its prime to fight global poverty and disease, he sacrificed the thing most tech leaders crave, being at the center of innovation, to focus on humanitarian causes. That sacrifice transformed him from a successful businessman into a moral leader whose influence extends far beyond technology. But here's what makes this psychologically devastating. When leaders sacrifice authentically, they create what I call moral debt in their followers. People feel obligated to live up to the standard the leader has set through their sacrifice. If the leader gave up millions for the mission, how can employees not give up their weekends? If the founder risked everything for the vision, how can team members not push through difficult times? The neuroscience is clear. Witnessing genuine sacrifice activates mirror neurons and creates empathetic bonds that bypass rational decision-making. Your brain literally mirrors the sacrifice, creating neural pathways that associate the leader's pain with your own values and commitments. Elon Musk has turned this into an art form. His public struggles, financial risks, and personal sacrifices aren't just business decisions. They're psychological tools that create deep emotional investment in his company's missions. When Tesla employees work 80-hour weeks, they're not just building cars, they're honoring Musk's sacrifice by making their own. But here's the dark side. This mechanism can be manipulated. Some leaders create artificial crises or exaggerate their sacrifices to trigger this psychological response without genuine commitment. The difference between authentic and manipulative sacrifice leadership is whether the leader is truly committed to something bigger than themselves or just using sacrifice as a tool for control. Jesus' sacrifice was authentic. He genuinely believed in the mission and paid the ultimate price. The billionaire CEOs who master this principle make real sacrifices for causes they genuinely care about, not just for psychological manipulation. Think of most leadership like being a chess grandmaster. You're incredibly skilled at moving pieces around the board to win games. People respect your intelligence and strategy, but when the game ends, everyone goes home to their own lives. But sacrifice leadership is like being a war general who fights alongside troops in the trenches. You don't just command from headquarters. You share the danger, the exhaustion, the risk. When soldiers see their general bleeding alongside them, something profound changes. This isn't just a job anymore, it's a cause worth dying for. That's exactly what Jesus did and what modern billionaire CEOs understand. They don't just ask people to work hard or buy products. They demonstrate through personal sacrifice that the mission is worth more than personal comfort, safety, or profit. The psychology is primal. Humans are tribal creatures who follow leaders who prove their commitment through costly actions. Words can lie, but sacrifice reveals true priorities. When someone gives up something valuable for a principle, our brains interpret that as honest proof the principle matters. Steve Jobs didn't just want great products, he sacrificed his health, relationships, and peace of mind to achieve perfection. Employees didn't just work for Apple. They worked for someone whose sacrifice proved that excellence was more important than easy success. Elon Musk doesn't just talk about sustainable transport and space exploration. He risked his entire fortune, slept on factory floors, and endured public ridicule to make these visions reality. That sacrifice transformed SpaceX and Tesla employees from workers into missionaries. The key insight: people don't follow what you say or even what you do. They follow what you're willing to give up. Your sacrifices reveal your true values, and people align with leaders whose values they want to adopt. But here's the crucial distinction: the sacrifice must be genuine. People can sense the difference between authentic sacrifice for a meaningful cause and manufactured hardship for psychological manipulation. Jesus' sacrifice was real. He genuinely gave everything for humanity's spiritual transformation. The most effective modern leaders make real sacrifices for causes they genuinely believe will make the world better. When sacrifice is authentic, it creates unbreakable bonds. When it's manipulative, it eventually backfires as people realize they've been exploited. The power of sacrifice leadership lies not in the technique, but in the genuine commitment that motivates it. These three secrets: servant leadership, identity parables, and strategic sacrifice, form what I call the Trinity of influence. Jesus mastered all three 2,000 years ago, and every billionaire CEO who has built a devoted following uses this exact psychological framework. They serve first to create trust, tell stories that shape identity, and sacrifice genuinely to prove commitment. Together, these techniques don't just create followers. They create believers willing to dedicate their lives to a vision bigger than themselves. But remember, with great influence comes great responsibility. These techniques work because they tap into fundamental human needs for connection, meaning, and purpose. Use them to genuinely serve others and create positive change, not just to accumulate power or profit. If these secrets exploded your mind, you need to see my next videos, but only if you hit the bell. Otherwise, you'll miss the most powerful secrets in history. What's your opinion on these ideas? Leave it below. Send this to someone with sharp insight. This analysis is speculative interpretation based on publicly available information and historical accounts, not clinical psychological diagnosis. The leadership techniques discussed are patterns observed across successful leaders throughout history and should be applied ethically for positive influence and genuine service to others.